Imagine you are standing beside a set of trolley tracks. In the distance, you see a trolley car hurtling down the tracks at 60 miles an hour. Its brakes have failed. There is a crew of workmen ahead on the main track, completely unaware of the danger they are in. There are 5 of them. You watch in horror as you realize that if the trolley continues on its present course, all 5 of them will surely be killed. You feel a sense of powerlessness, a spectator to an impending tragedy. But then you notice something. You are standing next to a switch, a lever that can divert the trolley onto a side track. Looking down that side track, you see there is also a worker there. But there is only one. The choice is yours, and yours alone. You can pull the lever, diverting the trolley onto the side track. The one worker on that track will be killed, but the other 5 workers on the main track will be saved. Or, you can do nothing. If you choose not to act, the trolley will continue on its path and the 5 workers will die. The single worker on the side track will be unharmed. What is the right thing to do in this situation? This is not just a thought experiment, it is a question that forces us to confront our deepest moral intuitions. The situation is stark. The numbers are clear. 5 lives versus 1 life. Many people, when first presented with this problem, have an immediate and strong reaction. They would pull the lever. The logic seems straightforward and compelling. It is better that 1 person should die than that 5 people should die. Saving the greatest number of lives seems like the most responsible and ethical course of action. It is a calculation, a grim but necessary arithmetic of survival. To choose to save 5 at the cost of 1 feels like the lesser of 2 evils, a tragic but justifiable decision made under extreme pressure. But not everyone agrees. Some people feel a deep-seated reluctance to pull that lever. For them, the act of pulling the lever is not just a calculation, it is a direct and deliberate act of killing. If they do nothing, the 5 workers will die, but their deaths will be the result of a pre-existing situation, a mechanical failure. It would be a tragedy, but not one of their making. To pull the lever, however, is to become an active participant. It means choosing to end someone's life, even if the intention is to save others. For these people, the moral prohibition against taking a human life is absolute and cannot be overridden by simple numbers. Let's explore these 2 different responses more closely. What are the reasons behind each choice? For those who would turn the trolley, the argument rests on consequences. They look at the possible outcomes and choose the one with the better result. In this case, the better result is clearly the one where fewer people die. Saving 5 lives at the expense of 1 is a tragic but rational decision. This way of thinking is powerful because it offers a clear principle for action. Always act in a way that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It is a practical approach to morality, focused on results rather than intentions or abstract rules. This consequentialist reasoning feels right to many of us. We are often taught to think about the impact of our actions on others. If you can prevent a great harm from occurring by allowing a lesser harm, it seems almost irresponsible not to do so. To stand by and watch 5 people die when you had the power to save them seems like a failure of moral duty. The person who pulls the lever might feel terrible about the death of the 1 worker, but they might also believe they made the only responsible choice available to them. They were faced with a terrible situation and chose to minimize the loss of life, a decision they can defend on logical grounds. On the other hand, what about those who would not pull the lever? Their reasoning is very different. It does not focus on the consequences of the action, but on the nature of the act itself. For them, the act of pulling the lever is an act of intentional killing. Even if it saves more lives, it involves making a conscious decision to sacrifice 1 person who was, a moment before, safe. The 5 workers on the main track are already in peril. The 1 worker on the side track is not. To divert the trolley is to bring a new threat upon an innocent person. This line of thinking suggests that some actions are simply wrong, regardless of their outcomes. This second perspective is rooted in a sense of categorical duties and rights. It suggests there are certain moral rules that we should not violate, even for a good cause. The rule against intentionally killing an innocent person is one of the most powerful of these. The person who refuses to pull the lever is not indifferent to the fate of the 5 workers. They are horrified by it. But they are even more horrified by the prospect of becoming a killer themselves. They believe that their primary moral duty in this situation is not to engineer the best outcome but to refrain from committing a wrongful act. It's a refusal to play God with human lives. Now, let's consider a second story. The situation is similar in some ways. There is a runaway trolley and it is heading towards 5 unsuspecting workers on the track below. They are certain to be killed if the trolley continues on its path. This time, however, you are not standing by a switch. You are standing on a footbridge that arches over the tracks, directly in the path of the oncoming trolley. You are a bystander just as before, watching the tragedy unfold. You feel that same sense of horror and helplessness. There is no side track and no lever to pull, but you are not alone on the bridge. Standing next to you, leaning over the railing and watching the scene below, is a very large man. He is a stranger. Yet with a sudden and chilling clarity that his great size is such that if you were to give him a little push, he would fall from the bridge onto the track below. His body is large enough to stop the trolley. He would die, but the 5 workers on the track would be saved. You are certain that a small nudge is all it would take. He is unsuspecting. Would you push him? Let's think about this new scenario. The numbers are exactly the same as in the first case. It is still a choice between 1 life and 5 lives. If you were someone who decided to pull the lever in the first story, based on the principle of saving the greater number, does that same logic apply here? A consistent consequentialist would have to say yes. The outcome is the same. 1 person dies, and 5 people live. If the goal is to produce the best possible result, then pushing the man off the bridge seems to be the morally required action. It is a terrible act, but it leads to a better world than the alternative where 5 people perish. Yet, most people who were willing to pull the lever in the first case feel a powerful revulsion at the idea of pushing the man in the second. The thought of physically laying hands on another person and sending him to his death is deeply disturbing, in a way that pulling a lever from a distance is not. The act feels more personal, more direct, and more violent. Why is that? Why does our moral intuition, which seemed so clear in the first case, suddenly become so conflicted and troubled in the second? The dilemma forces us to question whether our moral principles are as consistent as we would like to believe they are. The dramatic shift in people's responses between the 2 scenarios reveals something important about our moral psychology. In the first case, with the lever, the death of the 1 worker feels like a side effect of diverting the trolley. Your intention is to save the 5, and the death of the 1 is an unfortunate but indirect consequence of that action. You are operating a piece of machinery that then causes the death. There is a degree of separation between your action and the fatal outcome. It feels less like a direct act of killing and more like redirecting an existing threat from a larger group to a smaller one. In the second case, however, this separation vanishes entirely. Pushing the large man off the bridge is not a side effect of saving the 5. It is the means by which you save them. His death is not an unfortunate consequence of your action, it is the very instrument of your plan. You are using him as a tool, a mere object to be sacrificed for the benefit of others. His humanity is reduced to his physical size and weight, a means to an end. This is what makes the act feel so horrifying to most people. It violates a deep-seated principle that we should not use people as objects, that every individual has a right not to be used in this way. This distinction is at the heart of why our feelings change. The first case allows for a certain psychological distance. The lever is an impersonal mechanism. The second case is brutally personal. It requires you to make physical contact, to be the direct, unmediated cause of another person's death. This physical and psychological proximity makes the moral cost seem infinitely higher. The act of pushing is an act of violence, a direct assault on another human being. It triggers a different set of moral intuitions, ones that are less about calculation, and more about the intrinsic wrongness of certain actions. Many people who would not push the man might explain their choice by saying, he had nothing to do with it. The worker on the sidetrack was at least part of the same system. He was on the tracks. But the man on the bridge is a complete outsider, a bystander just like you. To involve him in the tragedy by pushing him feels like a profound violation. It crosses a line. This feeling points to a moral belief that individuals have certain rights that cannot be trampled, even for the sake of the greater good. The right not to be thrown in front of a trolley seems to be one of them. These trolley problems might seem like fanciful academic puzzles, but the moral questions they raise appear in real life. often in much more complex and, well, messy forms. The choices are rarely as clean, and the outcomes are never as certain. Think about the decisions faced by political and military leaders in times of war. Is it justifiable to bomb an enemy target if it is known that civilians will be killed in the attack? This is, in a sense, a trolley problem on a massive scale. The intention is to defeat an enemy and save the lives of your own soldiers or citizens, but the foreseeable consequence is the death of innocent people. A more concrete and honestly harrowing example can be found in the events of September 11, 2001. After terrorists hijacked several airplanes, a difficult question arose. United Airlines Flight 93 was still in the air, and it was believed to be heading for a target in Washington, D.C. What if the military had been in a position to shoot it down? This would have meant killing all the passengers and crew on board, who were innocent civilians, but it might have prevented an even greater catastrophe on the ground, potentially saving hundreds or even thousands of lives. The decision was never actually made, as the passengers bravely fought back and the plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. But the question remains, would it have been right to shoot down the plane? On one hand, the consequentialist argument is strong. Sacrificing the lives of those on the plane to save a much larger number of people on the ground seems like a tragic but necessary calculation. It is a horrifying choice, but one that aims to minimize the overall loss of life. From this perspective, failing to shoot down the plane could be seen as a failure to do what is necessary to protect the greatest number of people. It is a decision no one would ever want to make, but one that leaders must sometimes confront. On the other hand, a categorical argument would raise grave objections. The passengers on that plane were innocent victims. To shoot them down would be to intentionally kill them. It would be a direct act of violence by the state against its own citizens, even if done with the best of intentions. This perspective would argue that there are certain lines that must not be crossed. Certain acts that are wrong in themselves, regardless of the consequences. The act of shooting down a civilian airliner, full of innocent people, is one of those acts. This shows how the abstract trolley problem is really just a simplified version of the real agonizing choices people sometimes face. The trolley problem, in its various forms, helps to illuminate two fundamentally different ways of approaching moral reasoning. The first approach, which justifies pulling the lever or shooting down the plane, is called consequentialist moral reasoning. As the name suggests, this way of thinking locates morality in the consequences of an act. The right thing to do is whatever will produce the best overall state of affairs. The most famous version of this view is utilitarianism, which argues that we should always act to maximize happiness or well-being and minimize suffering. It's really all about the outcome. For a consequentialist, the moral quality of an action is determined by its results. Intentions might matter, but only insofar as they tend to produce good or bad results. The principle is simple and powerful. Of all the choices available to you, which one will lead to the best future? In the trolley problem, the choice that leads to only one person dying is better than the choice that leads to 5 people dying. It is a practical, almost scientific approach to ethics. It asks us to weigh costs and benefits, to calculate the best path forward, and to be guided by the evidence of what will create the most good in the world. The second approach, which justifies not pulling the lever or pushing the man, is called categorical moral reasoning. This view locates morality in certain duties and rights, regardless of the consequences. It argues that some actions are just wrong in themselves, and some rights are so fundamental that they must be respected, even if violating them would lead to a better outcome. From this perspective, the consequences are not the whole story. The moral worth of an act depends on its intrinsic nature, on whether it conforms to certain moral rules or duties. For someone thinking in categorical terms, the act of intentionally killing an innocent person is wrong, period. It does not matter if that act saves 5, or 10, or 100 other people. The act itself is a violation of a fundamental moral duty. This way of thinking emphasizes the importance of individual rights and human dignity. It says that people are not just numbers in a calculation, they are beings with intrinsic worth who cannot be used as a means to an end. This approach is less about calculating outcomes and more about adhering to principles, about acting in a way that is right, regardless of the cost. Both of these ways of thinking, consequentialist and categorical, are powerful, but both also face significant challenges. Let's start with consequentialism. While the idea of maximizing the good seems appealing, it can lead to conclusions that many people find troubling. If we only care about the sum total of happiness, does that mean we can justify sacrificing the rights of an individual or a minority for the sake of the majority? The case of pushing the man off the bridge is a perfect example. A strict consequentialist might have to bite the bullet and say that yes, you should push him. But this seems to ignore his individual rights and his inherent value as a person. This way of thinking can be used to justify many actions that seem deeply unjust. For example, ancient Romans might have argued that throwing Christians to the lions in the Colosseum was justifiable because it brought immense pleasure to the thousands of spectators. The happiness of the crowd outweighed the suffering of the few being sacrificed. Most of us today would reject this logic. We believe that individuals have certain basic rights that cannot be violated just to make others happy. This suggests that consequences are not the only thing that matters. There must be some limits to the pursuit of the greater good. Now let's look at the challenges for categorical reasoning. The idea that we must always follow certain moral rules, without exception, sounds noble, but can it be too rigid? What if you are faced with a situation where telling the truth would lead to a terrible outcome? Imagine a friend is hiding in your house from an attacker who comes to your door and asks if your friend is inside. A strict categorical moralist, like the philosopher Immanuel Kant, might argue that you must not lie, because lying is intrinsically wrong. But is it really better to tell the truth and send your friend to their death than to tell a lie and save their life? This highlights a major problem with categorical principles. They can seem inflexible and disconnected from the realities of human life. Sometimes, moral duties can conflict with one another. A duty not to lie might conflict with a duty to protect a friend from harm. Which rule should you follow? Categorical reasoning doesn't always give a clear answer. It can lead to a kind of moral paralysis or to outcomes that seem to defy common sense. Insisting on absolute moral rules can sometimes prevent us from doing the most compassionate and humane thing in a given situation, forcing us to uphold a principle at a terrible human cost. So, where does this leave us? We have seen two different ways of thinking about morality, and we've seen that both have their strengths and their weaknesses. Consequentialist reasoning, which focuses on results, is practical, but can be ruthless. Categorical reasoning, which focuses on rights and duties, protects individual dignity, but can be rigid and unyielding. The trolley problem does not have a single easy answer because it pits these two powerful moral intuitions against each other. It reveals a fundamental tension in the way we think about right and wrong. The disagreement and uncertainty that these problems generate are not a sign of confusion. On the contrary, they are a sign of moral reflection. When we argue about whether to pull the lever or push the man, we are not just playing a game. We are engaging in the difficult work of figuring out what we owe to one another as human beings. We are exploring the principles that should govern our lives together in a just society. These are the fundamental questions of political philosophy, brought to life in a dramatic and honestly, very personal way. They force us to examine our own beliefs and to listen to the reasons of others. The point of these thought experiments is not to find a final, definitive answer that everyone will agree on. People of goodwill can and do disagree about these matters. The point is to make us more aware of the moral principles at work in our own lives and in the life of our community. Thinking about these extreme situations helps us to clarify what we believe and why. It helps us to understand the different arguments that people make in public debates about everything from taxes and healthcare to war and human rights. These big political questions are often, at their core, disagreements about consequentialist and categorical principles. Ultimately, wrestling with these dilemmas is part of what it means to be a thoughtful citizen. Justice is not a formula that can be simply applied. It is a constant conversation, a negotiation between competing principles and conflicting values. The trolley problem is just a starting point for that conversation. It reminds us that asking what is the right thing to do is a question we must ask, not just in philosophy class, but every day, in our own lives and in our society. The process of asking, of debating, and of sometimes disagreeing is essential to our shared quest for a more just world.